We're back with No Raju. I'm so excited for this, our part two. Part one, we got into so many things, but not enough. And so I invited you back, and you graciously agreed to have another conversation with us about this time. We want to talk a little bit about how to really work with your client best, and a piece that I'm really, obviously at PJI, we're really excited about, which is how to engage the community. So welcome back, Mano. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ray. So great to be here with you.
All right, so let's talk. Let's start first with working with your client. And last time we touched on it a little bit, and I had talked about how a great lawyer that I got training from, Cynthia Roseberry, talked about rocking with your client,
Mm.
which kind of evokes for me sitting on a porch in a rocking chair and just having a conversation with your client. And we kind of talked a little bit about how you learn the most when you're really not even talking about the case, but you're really just, getting to know this other human being, and how it really enhances your ability to help represent and advocate for them because you learn so much more about things that you really didn't know that you even needed to know, right? So tell me a little bit about what the philosophy is at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office in terms of that approach.
Sure. And let me be clear with all these areas. This is something it's constantly evolving and we're constantly working on. But one thing we do emphasize is exactly that concept that you've talked about, which is rocking with your client. In the first client meeting, we call it a meeting, not an interview, because an interview is sort of it implies an extractive process, and people are on their guard when they're being interviewed, so it's a
Yep.
meeting. Same way it would be with a private client. We have the rule in our office that should take place within 4 to 48 hours of the arraignment. People are often seen by a pretrial release unit before the arraignment, and then also by the assigned attorney within 48 hours if someone's in custody. One thing we try to emphasize is people spending some time talking about something that has nothing to do with the case. Even if you have a lot of people to seek your arraignment, even if you're just spending 5-10 minutes talking about where you went to high school, tell me about your goddaughter, tell me about your favorite auntie, something about them where you're showing an interest and getting to know them as a person, because you may not
Yeah.
always have that time when you're busy or you have a lot of cases, but it shows that you care and you're starting to develop that reservoir of knowledge and feeling about your client.
Yeah.
Another thing
Yeah.
that I emphasize is literally going to your client's grandmother's home or family's home and looking at pictures and talking about the client in that way, and listening, more importantly, to the family about the client. And then you're starting to really develop a deeper understanding. And jurors can tell, in my experience, they can tell, is this someone you're appointed to represent or someone you deeply care about? I think that time ends up being a reservoir of feeling that you had, a repository, and it comes across. There are studies that show that about 70% of communication is body language, and
Hmm.
over 20% is the paraverbal communications, the emotional lilts, and only less than 10% is actually the content. All of that is developed over the course of rocking with your client. And I think when the finder of fact, whether it be a judge or a jury, feels that, it makes a big difference in the outcomes.
Yeah, I love the idea of going to visit with them and in their environment, right? You could sort of step into their world because when you talk with clients, they're not trained lawyers, right? They
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily know what is important to know about, like what a lawyer needs to know about the case to be the best advocate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you step into their world, you're going to get that, but you're going to get it through them just telling you about themselves. And what I love about going to their environment is then you also learn about who their supports are, who can
Mm-hmm.
show up for them, who can
Mm-hmm.
be witnesses potentially. You're never going to get that just, having a phone conversation or not being willing to kind of step into their world.
Exactly. I don't know if you've probably seen the movie Just Mercy or read the book. And in that movie, if you recall when Brian Stevenson went to the home, that client said, "You know what? I trust you now because no
Yeah.
one's ever gone to my home. And people made a phone call, but no one's ever actually gone out there and met with my family. You have my trust out there."
Yeah.
And side benefit, when he was out there, guess what he found out? The alibi witnesses said he wasn't here, and and it had an
Exactly.
amazing result. And I find when you're out at the scene and you're engaged or out with the family and engaged, things just pop up and a deeper understanding of the case and the outcome levers are going to help you. get those.
Well, what an honor to be invited into somebody's home too, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that's absolutely fantastic too. And I love that you mentioned Brian because I'm going to tell you a little story real quick. I turned 50 last month, and on my bucket list was to go to the Legacy Museum that he has helped open. It's an amazing experience if you get a chance to go to Birmingham, Alabama. But I find myself finding threads of his career because he's such an inspiration. So I love that you remember that piece from that movie. It really does bring it home as to kind of what you need to do to connect with your client. For me, I think the other thing that I have found is that our clients are really, really smart. They're
Mhm.
brilliant people and they have theories to advance as well. And they have strategy to give us as well. And if you don't have that conversation, right, they really are co-counsel.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I've often gotten a lot of inspiration and strategic calls that are, I'm 50-50, and I'll ask my client, well, what do you think? Where, and
Exactly.
it's been super helpful. I also find in jury selection, like there's certain jurors I'm going to vibe with, but there are certain jurors that my client's going to vibe with, and to really listen to them and say, what do you think? And he said, you know what? They're making eye contact with me. They weren't looking the other way. I felt the vibration with this jury. I think we should keep them. Or, I see their background, and based on my background, I think there could be some commonality here. I've often listened to their suggestions on who to keep, and found it to be very, very valuable.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because, as lawyers, we know that there are certain things that our clients absolutely have the last say on. And then there are certain things, and most things, quite frankly, within that case, uh, we really have the latitude to kind of make decisions based on our, expertise, obviously in consultation with the client. But I think sometimes overall, because of time and caseload or things like that, we sometimes forget to continuously consult with the client on all of
Mhm.
those decisions. And jury selection is a good one. As a public defender, we don't have the luxury to have two or three jury consultants sitting behind us giving us,
Mhm.
ideas and advice. So yeah, your client is absolutely the expert on that. And
Right.
that also, I think, plays into procedural justice. We talk a lot about how our client gets treated by other people in the system, but that includes us too, right? And
Absolutely.
so their thought process that we're including them, that we're respecting their ideas, that goes a long way in terms of them feeling that they've had a fair opportunity to be heard and it's a fair process as well. So we absolutely have a role to play there too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about now. You mentioned early on, you said you have this rule in your office, need to go out. Goal is to see them within 24, 48 hours of the arraignment. But you mentioned that they get seen by somebody from your office prior to that
Right.
pre-trial because you have this in the cycle program. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So we have a PRU, pre-trial release unit, that goes in and gets information, investigator, an attorney, or a paralegal, to help assist the eventually assigned attorney with the release motion on the first day. In addition, calling family, making sure they're less anxious, securing video if it needs to be secured before that's erased. But in addition to that, we started an end the cycle program. My thought on this is, look, there's a lot of talk about public safety right now. Public defenders can be such an agent of public safety. If we have boots on the ground social workers going in and meeting with our clients in that pretrial release period, they're going to trust us because they already know we are pushing for their best legal outcome. We're going to vigorously defend their constitutional rights. And what they tell us is confidential, so they can share anything with us. Listen, I'm still using this controlled substance, or I'm not really comfortable in that part of town. Someone else might make an assumption or a judgment or make it a probation violation, for example, if they know that. But us, we're not, that's not going to happen with us. So, and it's two things. One, the ability to connect with the client and really see them. And two, the ability to navigate system. To say, listen, I think for you, this mentor with the Simone Community Center would be excellent, or this substance use disorder counseling, or this harm reduction, this would be good for you. Or maybe it's a connection to labor, or a connection to, we started a college prep program with City College and San Francisco State, two colleges in San Francisco, to start connecting our clients there. Or maybe it's a combination of those. From that position of trust, to really connect that client. So while we're working on the best legal outcome the case, we're also trying to end the cycle of whatever the underlying issue may have been that brought them into our care to begin with.
Yeah, I love that because I think it accomplishes a ton of things. The two things that really resonate with me is one, the first contact that they have with the public defender's office isn't specifically about that case, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
what do you need? What supports do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Which immediately is a whole different experience for them. Like you mentioned, every other piece of the system has been interrogating them up to that point, right? And so now you have somebody that comes in and just says, "Hey, let's figure out how we can get you whatever support and resources you need." And the second thing is that it's a warm handoff. We often say, "Oh, there's a ton of resources in the community. Why aren't people just going and using them?" And there may be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know exactly where to go or who to speak to, what hours those resources are available, it can be extremely intimidating. When you have somebody who says, "Oh, you can go to this building and speak to Mary at the front desk," or, "Hey, I will help facilitate this scheduling this appointment for you so you know exactly where to go," it makes a huge difference in terms of the follow through that you get. I can only imagine that there's a lot of drop off when you don't have that warm handoff.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I'm trying to navigate my kid's school right now, and it's like I'm getting the email back, and I keep on getting some form, a Google form coming back, and someone said, "No, you have to email this person." I said, "Oh, okay," and then I got a response back. But I needed someone with that expertise to tell me that.
Yeah, right. To just tell you that this is the place, not this place, right?
Right, exactly.
We often have clients just going to the wrong door,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It could be the right building, it's just the wrong door.
Exactly,
And so
exactly,
what we want to do is just get them in the right door.
exactly. So
Yeah,
those
okay.
system navigators that are allied with public defender's office actually key to our vision of community health and public safety.
I love that. So I can only imagine what more you all could do, how much more you all could impact community safety, and reductions in recidivism if you had a little more of that public safety pie.
Exactly.
But again, I don't think people look at everyone in the system as being, contributors to public safety. But public defenders are some of the hugest contributors to public safety.
Exactly. And while we're going to continue to advocate for a larger share of that pie, I think it's also important for a public defender's office to say, listen, unfortunately, we're not going to get everything we need, but let's try and get something.
Yeah.
Let's try and convince your mayor or your board of supervisors. Let me start. Give me one or two or three of these. In this case, system navigators, and client empowerers, and let's see what they can accomplish. And then I'll show you how that's working, and then maybe you can give me one or two more, and just keep on moving in that direction. So what I've tried to do since I was elected is do these experiments and pilot projects to show proof of concept, and then we can reach for outside funding or hopefully eventually city resources to support it.
Yeah, because then you can bring them the numbers and say,
Right.
"Look, at all the folks we've helped, look how it has assisted in this or that." And hopefully that's enough
Yes.
for folks to say this is a worthwhile program, and it's going to save us money in the long run, right? Okay, let's talk a little bit about community engagement.
Sure.
There is a piece to what you do or have done that I'm almost giddy at how excited I was when you first told me about this, because I it would have never occurred to me to do this. I'm actually a little embarrassed that it would never occurred to me to do this because I was a public defender for 8 years. But I want to talk a little about a case where I'm assuming it was a drug case because you think you told me a little bit about it, but at some point you were able to get a community member who had years of experience in the community qualified as an expert to really counter a lot of, I would say, template language that
Hmm.
police officers sometimes use when it comes to drug cases. They will sometimes amplify finding Ziploc baggies in somebody's house. We all have Ziploc baggies in our house, right? So, things like that. So you were able to say, "You know what? I know somebody who's been in the community doing the work. I think he should speak about what it really looks like if you're
Hmm.
out there doing certain nefarious activities in the community." And the judge agreed. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I've done this in a couple contexts. One of them has been in a drug for sale context where they have a police officer testify about what these baggies mean, what these amounts means, why it has to absolutely be for sale. They claim they've talked to all these users and dealers, and that's the basis of it. In one case, one thing I did is because they testified at a preliminary hearing before the trial, I've talked to all these users and dealers, just sent them a letter. Tell me the names of these users and dealers that you've talked to. Of course, he came back and said, well, I don't have the names of any of those people. So I said, so this is the textbook you want me to trust, and you can't cite anything in your textbook. And I brought in a counselor who was a former user, who's worked and understands people. People buy in bulk sometimes. Sometimes if the person has a bunch of small baggies, that's all they have. You may buy a lot at that moment because it's cheaper. People who are dealing with substance use disorder are rational in the economic market. So if they have the resources, they prefer to get it for less. But I've also used it, Ray, in the gang context, in the
Nice.
context when they're trying to label my client as a gang member. There's a lot of times if you're in particular areas with in areas with public housing, they're often labeling a lot of the brown and black youth as gang members or associates. So I actually had a pickup basketball game that I went to every Sunday at a public high school here in San Francisco, and there was someone from one of the areas where a lot of people are labeled as gang members or associates who did a lot of work with youth. And he said, these groups that they're calling gangs are actually not criminal street gangs. And I said, I need you to come to court and say that and explain why the tattoo doesn't mean what they're saying. Or why even carrying a gun doesn't mean what they're saying. Because what the police officer would say, the gang cop that they're qualifying as an expert is, this is like a carpenter's hammer. They're taking this out there to do their work. And my community expert was saying, no, he's actually praying he won't have to use this gun. And when he gets home, he's praying that he didn't use the gun. Most of these youth who are carrying don't actually want to carry this, but they're afraid, and they're carrying it prayerfully, hoping they don't have to use it. And this person was also someone from the neighborhood, knew all the dynamics, was able to distinguish between people, and I brought him to court on this
Yeah.
life gang case, and I said, "Here's my expert." And the judge said, "Well, he hasn't taken all these courses that the gang task force cop expert has taken, so I don't think I can qualify him as a gang expert." I said, "Okay, that's fine. Client's not a gang member. They think he's a gang member. You can qualify him as a community expert.
Right.
I'll call my community expert. They can call their gang expert, and we'll let the jury decide." Now, the reality is my community expert knew all about the symbol, about the tattoos, knew everything in rich detail, knew about all the people they were putting in this quote unquote gang. But I was like, that's fine. He also understands the dynamics of community here. I found that the jurors were really hungry for that. They were so appreciative, on the edge of their seats. And the jury immediately came back and said, no, absolutely not a gang member, not true, not guilty. He got the underlying charge, they weren't able to get a conviction. The code says that as long as the subject is beyond the common experience, so it would help the trier effect, the person has enough expertise. So many times there's just a schism between where many of our jurors may be from, and the neighborhoods that our clients grew up in.
Right.
It's, my parents come from a village in South India, and oftentimes some of the dynamics in that village. I have an uncle who was wrongfully accused of a murder because of our caste. I have an auntie who can look at anyone based on hairstyle, know exactly what community they're from and what neighborhood they're from. That type of internal expertise is, I think, something jurors want. And so, in some ways, the distance between some parts of San Francisco and other parts might as well be the distance between my parents' village, in terms of some of the cultural context and some of the misunderstandings there are. A lot of times you're labeled as a gang member because you're spending time with family. So to have a community expert who can explain some of those dynamics, who can explain why some people might not exactly be totally transparent with the police officer, a whole lot of areas it can be really helpful. Most recently, I called an expert on the concept of jail phone calls because the prosecution was trying to interpret the calls and say, well, your client said this. And I said, are you aware of all the dynamics on a jail phone call? There's someone who might overhear you, so you're thinking about them. You're also trying to ease the worries of your family members. This is not sworn testimony. There's so many dynamics going on here in those calls. So I called someone who has a lot of family, who have been incarcerated, who's been on thousands and thousands of jail calls. She does amazing work in an area of San Francisco, which is under-resourced. And she just talked about, like, you can't draw any leap or make any conclusions based on what's on this jail phone call, because there's so many other dynamics and cultural factors related to why this person's saying what they are. And they're often having to do with who's in the jail and family members are trying to put at ease. So, for example, if you hurt someone, but it was in self-defense, you're not necessarily going to say that out there because they'll be worried about you. They'll be worried about the implication. You may say, listen, it had nothing to do with me. I wasn't there. Don't worry. Then on the stand, when you have a chance to testify, when it's under oath, you'll say the full, no, it was self-defense and this is what, let me explain that to you. But that's too much to explain on a jail phone call. Or people in the community could be worried about, oh, I'm worried about my loved one in jail. They could be retaliated against all sorts of things. So so I qualified this one expert on the dynamics of jail phone calls. I think there's a lot of times where if we start using these experts, these facts that we think, oh, we can't get beyond, you better plead to this client because we can't get beyond it. If we start using these community experts, we can get over those aspects that we think are fatal to our case. If we can just explain the context, sure, I've found over and over again, they will listen to it and we can get great results.
Yeah, for me, this moves the ball. Like this is like for me because we have such limited budgets as public defenders to try to get expert. And I think that even as lawyers, we tend to think that the expert has to have a certain amount of education and training. That's what we think of when we think of qualifying somebody as an expert, right? But what you've done is you've said, hey, experience can trump that. And I don't need to go toe to toe with the state. I don't need to have them qualified as the same type of expert as the expert that they're qualifying. I'm going to qualify them as a community expert, which I think is amazing because you're right. In gang cases, it's sort of guilty by association. And then in the jail call cases, they will say that anything that's coded, they can say it's anything they think it is, right? They will paint it as though the person who's incarcerated making the call is coding their language specifically to avoid the police listening. When really that's the kind of the last thing on their mind in that moment. Like you said, they're more conscious about the other folks standing around them. And I think it also helps to give the average person a visualization of what this looks like in the jail, right?
Right.
Because we think of our phone calls and we think, well, most of the time I have the ability to step away and get privacy. That just doesn't happen in jail.
Right.
There's a bank of phones, and you're like 12 inches, 6 inches next to the next person. They can hear everything. So you're really more cognizant of what they're hearing. And like you said, comforting the person on the phone. So, your mom or family member might say, what happened? Did you do that? And your client might say, I'm not worried about all of that. Just to kind of shut the conversation down. And the next thing you know, you're in court and their expert will say, well, clearly that's an admission. And you're like, what? No, that's not at all. So this is our call to public defender. We don't have a lot of money for experts, but you can use the community as an expert. Doesn't mean every judge is going to go for it. But like you said, we keep making the argument. And eventually the ball moves. Eventually you're going to get a judge that's going to say, yeah, and then you're going to go to the next court and say, well, Judge so-and-so qualified him. And you build this momentum.
Exactly. That's what happened here. Like Judge so-and-so qualified him. So then when he went to testify in the next courtroom, we said, well, he was qualified down the hall. And so, okay, explain this to me again. And then they qualified him. We've cultivated other experts in other areas. And oftentimes this will make a bigger difference in the outcome of the case than, we have these big conferences on DNA and all, and that's very key. But oftentimes that's not the big factor in the case. That scientific piece, it is this community piece. It is understanding that context. It is doing that cultural translation for the jury to understand the world that they.
Yeah, because I think the jury looks at this community person and says, okay, I get that the state's expert has studied this, but this person has lived it. I think there's just sort of some inherent genuineness to it and authenticity to it that I think really resonates with the jury. I'm imagining you cultivate this list for your office and say, hey, we got another one qualified. If you need to talk to somebody about gang stuff, here's our guy. And these are the courts where they've been qualified. So you can make that argument. You got something similar like that with your cop monitor program, which I think is amazing. It is something that when I was practicing, we didn't have this formal list. It was sort of word of mouth. It's much more formalized now, which I think is amazing, because you wouldn't believe that there are cops who have been found to be not credible by certain judges, and other judges aren't aware of it, or defense attorneys aren't aware of it. You best believe most of the prosecutors are aware of it, but whether or not they disclose that is a different story. But you have or sort of this database of information that is not only available to the community, but you're asking the community to add to it if needed, right? Tell us
Yeah,
about that, because this is amazing.
sure. So when I was first elected, one thing that struck me was the proliferation of organizations out there that are supposed to be holding the police accountable with the name police in their name.
Right.
Department of Police Accountability, the Police Commission, the police department themselves. People are not that likely to go to anything with the name police in it to complain about the police. But who do
Mhm.
people complain about particular police officers do all day and every day? Public defenders. Initial vision was let's have a physical or an electronic window where we start collecting that information. Because a lot of times when we talk to the client about the case, and they'll say, an officer will come and say, oh, by the way, that officer, a whole slew of complaints. We say, I get it, but let me focus back on the case. But no, that's
Yep.
important information. That's important
Yes, it
information
is.
for us as public defenders. That's important information for the community to have also. So the idea is let's see if we can house in a public defender's office this information about the police. In California, it's very difficult to get information about the police. There's a lot of privacy rights that they invoke, and a lot of these records are shielded from the public. That's why so it's been called the most secretive state in the country in terms of
Oh,
police information. That's why I thought it's important to the extent we can publicly share this information, because the people have the right to know who are the people policing them.
yep.
And
Right.
defenders have a right to anything that is potentially useful that we could use in that case about that witness. We should be able to use. That's the vision behind Cop Monitor. We call it our integrity unit, because the idea is that these convictions don't have integrity if there are police coming up there and not being properly cross-examined. There are witnesses and our clients who often can get impeached with anything that's part of their prior record. Same for police officers.
That's right. What's
And
fair game?
exactly. One of the things that I'm most proud of that our integrity unit, along with people in my policy unit, were able to accomplish was to push the police commission to enact a policy against pretextual stops, which is where the police are pulling people over for expired tabs, broken taillights, things they know are not in any way interfering or affecting public safety in any way, when they're really looking for a fishing expedition.
Hmm.
When pulling people over because they're brown or black and they're looking for things. It's going to be extremely traumatic, obviously. It can be deadly, as we know, from the police killings that are all too common in this country. And even if there's not shots fired, it can be extremely traumatic if guns are drawn or people are detained. Or not just the person who was detained, but all the people in the car in that moment. It has huge psychological trauma on our community. So in an attempt to minimize that, we push for this policy, and we got a whole coalition. We got the bike coalition on board, because they're saying, listen, the police are pulling over people and they're missing the person who's blowing
Yep.
the stop sign. So actually, this effort of pretextual stops is a counter to public safety.
Yeah, it's actually creating more dangerous
It's
situations.
creating more
Yeah.
dangerous situations. Exactly. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of that our office, along with, and we work with other community-based organizations. So we had a whole coalition that came together to push the police commission. Now we have one of the most progressive policies in the country regarding these pretextual or biased stops.
Oh, I love that. You mentioned two things that I want to circle back to. One is when your client is telling you their story, in particular, like what happened in this incident, they will drop these little gems, but you could almost miss it because it's so endemic to their community that they're not even enraged anymore, but they'll just drop this gem. I can relate. I had a case once. It was a drug case. And as my client is talking, he tells me that the officers pulled up, they called this set of cars the night train, because these cops would come through the neighborhood at a particular time at night. They would come 5 deep, and they would pull up really fast, jump out, and just start grabbing people. But he's not saying it like this is horrifying, because this was just what happened. And he says this cop grabbed me and actually sexually assaulted him by trying to find drugs in certain cavities. But he wasn't outraged by it because it wasn't the first time it had happened. I'm outraged by it.
Yeah.
And he gives me this cop's name. I have another case. The cop's name comes up again, right? Now I'm feeling that we have a pattern here. And who polices the police but the police? So I go to the prosecutor on the case and I say, we've got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I got? Deaf ears. I don't hear anything you're saying. I don't believe that that cop would do that. Fast forward 6 months, he's indicted federally, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because it
Mm-hmm.
was a string of these.
Right.
Your clients are truthful people.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling you what's happening.
Right.
We just have to listen. Everybody has to listen. We assume that when somebody is accused of a crime, that they will lie and say anything to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
My experience has been that they're really truthful. My clients would tell me all the time, okay, I did this, but I didn't do this, right? Or yes, I did that, or I didn't do any of that. So my experience is that we just have to listen, but they'll say it so nonchalantly that you can miss it. Right. Like you were saying, they'll say something like, yeah, this cop, but really, that other cop did this. But then they'll just sort of go back to the conversation. And so we really have to listen to that. I don't think the greater public understands, like you were mentioning, the level of psychological terror and terrorism that they really experience on a daily basis with the way that their communities are policed. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important is in having this database available, because like you said, our clients will certainly get questioned about certain things if they chose to testify. It's fair game to ask these police officers about their behavior in prior contexts that are similar to this context. I'm assuming the prosecutors have tried to shut it down with objections, but have the judges been allowing that, because I don't know why they wouldn't, allowing you to get into that line of questioning with police officers?
I mean, it's always a little more challenging with police officers, but I think the more that we have access to information, and sometimes we'll find that, the prosecutors are like, well, let me not just
Right.
on the stand at all because I'm
Yeah.
aware of that. And another piece, though, is on a city budget fund. Cities should want public defenders to be collecting this information because they're paying out money in civil lawsuits when they have officers who have this kind of history. If we don't get that information to them, they're going to be paying out this money in civil lawsuits. It's going to be put to veterinary use.
Yeah, I have found that I'm quite impressed by prosecutor offices that have their own list. It's like we're not going to call these cops. They have so much. They only have so much power and influence too, right? Ultimately, it's up to the police departments to weed those folks out. But they have their list too. They don't always share that list. I think that that's exculpatory evidence, but I'm not the judge. But I at least give credit to DA's offices that at a minimum have that list. And certainly I give kudos to those offices that turn it over to the defense. They might still call that officer because they think that the facts are different enough that this officer is still credible in this context. But I don't think enough prosecutors' offices keep those lists and certainly don't turn those over to the defense, which I think the defense should be entitled to. So kudos for not only keeping that information, but having it on your website. San Francisco Public Defender's Office has another program that I think is amazing, the We the Jury program. Now, what's I think is great about this is at PJI, we have a help desk where folks can send us a question, and then we try to provide them with the information. And we have gotten in the past year that I've been with PJI a couple of questions about, do you know about programs that help people understand more about what it means to be a juror, what that process looks like, which I think is great because I think we should all want is for everybody who gets that jury summons to go down and fulfill their civic duty. Because one of the things that we don't, I think, have enough of is community representation on our jury, so that when our client is sitting there, they feel like they are being judged by their peers to some extent. I know some of our clients think that should mean, if our client is 20-year-old Black man, he thinks it should be, 12, 20-year-old Black man. That's not quite what it means, but it should mean that he can see himself in the jury pool. And so helping the community understand what that responsibility is so that they, in fact, will fulfill it, I think is amazing. So tell us a little bit about the We the Jury program.
Sure. It's actually called Be the Jury.
Oh, it's Be the Jury?
Be the Jury, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying We the Jury.
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, Be the Jury, but although We the Jury would be an equally so this, I mean, there have been some changes in the law that make it more difficult for prosecutors to use their peremptories in a discriminatory fashion. That's one thing. But Be the Jury program was designed to, and there's a lot of areas we have to work on to get more reflective jurors, better juries for our peers. But what this was about was the economic factor. There are so many times where the judge says, who's going to have an economic hardship? You see a whole bunch of people, hands go up, and you see a lot of people leaving the room. And they tend to be people who don't have the resource, don't have the income of other jurors. And sometimes it's even people from the same neighborhood. Is where the incident happened, who would actually have the most vested interest, and we should want them on the jury. And often people with the most sort of street smarts to bring and common sense of the issues to bring to that jury room. So the vision behind this is that's undemocratic. We should, and with as much wealth as there is in the Bay Area, we shouldn't have people financially hardshipping off of juries. So I approached the treasurer, Cisneros, in San Francisco, and I told him about this, and he said, let's work on that. They have a wing of their office, the Financial Justice Project, within the Treasurer's Department, that was eager to work with us on this. So they raised the philanthropic funds, and we came up with a formula where if you're below a certain income level and your employer does not pay for jury service, you'll get $100 a day.
That's amazing.
So instead of the $15 a day, they're getting paid, which is then dramatically increasing the racial and class diversity of our jury. The people who have participated in the program is hugely successful, are very grateful to have participated in this process. It really is undemocratic to kick people off of juries because of their lack of resources. And the jury is missing out on the wisdom of that group. So we've done surveys of the people, everyone who's been part of the program has filled out the survey. They were all grateful for having the opportunity to serve. And oftentimes the other jurors are grateful for having that perspective in the jury room. So it's been really a win-win. We got the district attorney's office on board with that also, because wouldn't really be cool to say that you're opposed to a program like that. So the district attorney's on board with that. We've had some challenges with the funding this year, but we have retained it. So we're going to be able to, in a slightly different fashion, keep it going for at least another year. And we're hopeful to eventually have it be a permanent part of the city budget.
That's amazing. The idea that somebody can't afford to be on a jury is wild to me, but it's true. So before that project, they were getting $15 a day.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think the general public realizes that it varies by jurisdiction, how much a person gets paid to be a juror. But nowhere that I know of do you get paid the same as if you had gone to work that day. I know that much.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think everybody assumes that everybody's job pays them if they have to go to jury duty, and they don't. Well, your job could say, yes, we'll give you the time off, but we're not paying you for that day. So could you imagine being on a week-long trial and you've gotten $15 for 7 days? Mm-hmm. That could cause someone to be evicted. That could cause someone to lose their car. So I don't think most people understand that it is economically prohibitive for some people, even if they want to follow through with their civic duty, that they can't. Man, I didn't even realize that it was $15 a day. I didn't even know that it could get that low. I think here in Clark County, it's $40 a day, which is much more, but 15 wouldn't even cover their lunch. That is bananas.
Yeah, and this is one thing, again, it was a pilot program. We're still keeping it alive. The idea is just to keep these kind of initiatives going to make our system, more equitable and more fair. There were people around the country who took a knee when George Floyd was murdered. And it's really important that we do that. It's really important that we're aware of those brutal forms of police violence that happen on the street. But violence happens in our system all the time. When someone pleads to something they shouldn't plead to because they don't, they're going to get a fair jury of their peers, that's a form of state violence. So any of these areas that we can work on, whether it's End the Cycle program, Be the Jury program, Pop Monitor, community experts, all these things contribute to hopefully having more just results and not having people simply plead to things just because of the weight of the state.
Very, very well said, Mano. As we wrap up, tell us what do you see on the horizon for the kinds of projects or advocacy that you guys are wanting to accomplish in the next year or two? What's on the horizon for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office?
Okay. Well, we have a lot of, as you know, I have a lot of irons in the fire. We've had a lot of pilots. We didn't even talk much in depth about our college prep program, but so we have a lot of these pilots that we've started, and we want to keep those going. I'm also in the process with my team of exploring an art diversion program. So I'd
I
love to
love it.
get
Look at
that
here.
off the
Art and
ground.
love and equity and justice. These are our pretrial justice t-shirts that I love.
Exactly. With bail reform, there are some more people who are entitled to be out during the pendency of their cases and not locked up. And during that time, I think it's an opportunity to really figure out what's going to ignite that person. I hate the concept of just stay out of trouble. We should be encourage our clients to go towards something, whether that's, as I said before, Class City College or a part-time or full-time job or pursuing art, going towards something and not just trying to stay away from something. And I'm also looking into programs with some other agencies in the city about having counselors that are really navigators to sort of extend the vision of our End the Cycle program by having collaborations with counselors, spiritual counselors, who are also able to connect people with services throughout the city. That's another thing that's on the horizon, but I'm always open to other ideas from other offices. So if someone gives me another idea, I'll probably try to figure out how to make that a pilot too. So.
No, that's amazing. This idea of not just getting released to stay out of trouble, but getting released to thrive, right?
Yes.
Resume your life, but also like, you know, do great. I don't like the idea that that some services aren't accessible until they have walked through the door of criminal justice. But that is the reality for some folks. So it's like, you know what? We don't necessarily think you should be here, but as long as you are here, what can we do to help so that when you leave the door, when you walk out, you're better for it and you don't come back,
Exactly.
right? We don't catch you back into this net. I love that idea.
Yes. If there's a
Yeah,
way that we can enable people, facilitate them getting their life on a more positive trajectory, consistent with what they want, then
exactly.
it's a prime opportunity for us to be able to do that.
I love that. Well, Mano, you are such a delight. I love, love, love what you guys are doing at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. You have used every penny of the public dollar in an efficient and effective way to not only zealously represent clients, but also to impact public safety. And that is a model that I think can be replicated across the country and should be. Thank you for what you do, for your time.
Thank you so much, Ray. It's always great being in community and conversation with you. I always learn a lot from our conversation.
Love it. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.